Do please be seated. Good morning and welcome to St. Peter's Church. For those who don't know, my name is Charles Clapham. I'm the vicar here, and we're joined also by the Reverend Bert-Jan van der Lakemat. And it's a great honour to be hosting this service today. We have come here today to remember before God our sister Selma van der Perre, to give thanks for her life, to commend her to God, our merciful Redeemer and Judge, to commit her body to be buried, and to comfort one another in our grief. We begin with a short prayer. Almighty God, you judge us with infinite mercy and justice, and love everything you have made. In your mercy, turn the darkness of death into the dawn of new life, and the sorrow of parting into the joy of heaven. Amen. You have sight, I hope, of an order of service. Essentially, we're going to proceed unannounced. Various people are going to come and speak. They know who they are, so we'll speak from this lectern here. And the rest of us just remain seated. There's a little interlude of some music in the middle, a piece by Mendelssohn, just to give us time for reflection. But otherwise, I think we're going to begin by inviting Selma's son, Jos, to say a few words. Thank you.
Good afternoon. For those of you that do not know me, I'm Jocelyn, Selma's son. I'd like to thank you all for coming today, whether in person or by video. Part of the reason we're here today is that my father was also buried from this church in 1979, and she will now be buried alongside him at Mortlake. Others are about to tell my mother's life better than I could, so I'd just like to say a few words of thanks to Team Selma. This group of friends, with help from her carers, kept a thorough eye on my mother for the last few years and enabled her desire, or was that really a demand, to continue to live in our family home right to the end. So, Team Selma, thank you for all your time and help and the space it gave me. I've been asked whether there is a meet-up after. My mother was not really much of a pub person, and to be honest, I feel it should be possible to organise a more fitting memorial event in the future. I'd now like to hand over to Lorraine, who has memories of my mother as teacher. Thank you all again.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lorraine Verscoyle-King. I'm very honoured to have been asked by Jocelyn to reflect on Selma's time as a teacher at the Sacred Heart High School in Hammersmith. I'm a former pupil and attended the school between 1972 and 1979. Selma, or Mrs. van der Perre, as she was known to us at school, taught maths and sociology, but never, in fact, me in this capacity. One day, she happened to take the register for the lower sixth form. She noticed from the list of names that two of us had Dutch surnames, me with Verscoyle and my fellow pupil Mary with the name Verdult. Selma asked whether either of us spoke any Dutch, which we did not. When she discovered that we were both studying French and German at A-level, she asked if we would also be interested in learning Dutch with her. And there our story began. Selma gave up 2 lunch breaks each week to teach Mary and me Dutch during the sixth form. We still have the textbooks that we used with her. Additionally, Selma secured us funding from the Belgian government to attend a Dutch class that she taught at the Goethe Institute in Kensington. It was principally for business people learning Dutch, but Mary and I were more than happy to have access to the additional classes. We both then studied German at Edinburgh University, and Mary went on to become a translator for the European Union. She would say that obtaining her first translator job was very much attributable to her knowledge of Dutch. Selma certainly inspired Mary's career path, but she instilled in both of us a love of languages, different cultures, and an interest in the wider world in general. She was a role model for working and independent women. Selma has been lauded and celebrated internationally for her bravery and vital contribution to the resistance movement during the war. But to us pupils in the 1970s, she was simply a kind, patient, and dedicated teaching professional. We had no idea that Selma had a Jewish upbringing, had lost so many family members, and had herself ended up in Ravensbrück as a political prisoner. A remarkable story which only later started to spread amongst former pupils. We listened to the many interviews and documentaries that came before and after the publication of her book, Mijn naam is Selma. And despite having lived through danger and pain during the war, Selma was never embittered or resentful in her dealings with others. She was full of hope and optimism. It was never all about her. She was just as interested in finding out about our lives, what we were up to, and what careers we were pursuing. And oh, always so very elegant. She stood out in her smart two-piece woolen business suits with her leather briefcase, and always a beret tilted to one side of her head. At school and thereafter, perhaps the beret was the only nod to her resistance role. In more recent times, many of us were fortunate to have been able to get back in contact with Selma, even attending a pub lunch with her during lockdown. Not even COVID was going to stop Selma. She hardly ever missed the annual school reunions organised by the Sacred Heart Association. Mary and I, and others I'm sure, were able to take her out for the occasional lunch with her rollator. With her very sophisticated food palate, she was a frequent visitor to restaurants along King Street. When she wasn't able to get out much, we brought lunch to her. She had boundless energy and was as sharp as a tack. With the help of Rosaline McHugh, another Sacred Heart girl, Selma kept up with her correspondence and diary, even though her sight had failed her by then. An incredibly smart and interesting woman, ahead of her time for sure. After teaching and a career in journalism well into her later years, she filled her days with very many interests, including golf, bridge, and painting. She was extremely proud of her son, her husband, and her father-in-law's notable political and media career in Belgium. Selma has a considerable fan club amongst the former staff and pupils at Sacred Heart. Mary and I are extremely grateful to her for the personal time she devoted to teaching us Dutch. The whole school, however, remembers her with tremendous pride and respect, and we deeply mourn her passing.
It's wonderful how, as the picture builds, the constant themes will come out, and I think you'll hear a bit more of that in what I've got to say. So we have the flags at half-mast in St. Peter's Square for Selma today, because as well as being an international celebrity, she was also a very long-term and pivotal member of the community. So my name's Steve Askins, and I'm honoured that Joss has asked me to say a few words on behalf of Selma's local friends, Team Selma, to quote Joss, local friends and neighbours, and indeed my wife's family knew Selma for well over 60 years. One of the wonderful things about Selma was that you never came away from a conversation with her without feeling enriched. She always added value and made you feel special. She was on top of the news, she had clear opinions and brought wisdom and experience to any discussion. So as newlyweds, Selma and her husband Hugo, there's a wonderful picture on the back of the order of service, moved to the St. Peter's area in the mid-1950s. Originally they rented in St. Peter's Square before, unbeknownst to Selma, Hugo bought the house in Black Lion Lane. And the family, as Jocelyn has said, have lived there ever since. When they moved here, it was a very different area to what we see and love today, in that it was still recovering from the battering it received in the Second World War. There were bomb sites, particularly along Black Lion Lane and St. Peter's Grove, and a lot of damaged buildings. The gardens in the square were also recovering from having a large air raid shelter in the northern end and allotments to grow food in the southern. Hugo and Selma really saw the area for what it was, the potential that it had, and they were long-term and early evangelists for this then little-known part of Hammersmith. It was a bit too far west for many people's views, but Hugo introduced the area to Richard and Angela Dixon in the late 1950s, and Angela, who's with us here today, has been instrumental in preserving the best of the area, particularly the historic buildings. So had it not been for Hugo and Selma, it's likely that this would be a very different place today. Selma was also a founder member of the St. Peter's Residents Association in the late Queen's Silver Jubilee year, 1977, and we honoured her as a SPRA hero at our 40th celebrations. Memorably, she also attended our 2022 AGM at the age of 100 and seconded a number of motions, as many members who were there on the day will remember. And touchingly, the meeting was attended by the then youngest member of the community. I think they sat close to each other, who was then only a few weeks old. As we've heard a little bit already, but one of the many remarkable things about Selma was that whenever she turned her hand to something, she excelled, whether it was art, golf, bridge, and of course writing the bestseller autobiography. She was a very determined and courageous lady. Her zest for life meant that there was no one-floor living in later life for Selma. She embraced the three-storey house and the challenge of the stairs, which really, I think she kept her going, of course, with her daily constitutional in St. Peter's Square. So Selma really did embrace old age with gusto, enjoying those who helped care for her as her sight waned and she became more dependent on those around her. But these were very two-way relationships, benefiting both the caregivers and the receiver. And as we've heard, Team Selma really helped her maintain her independence, particularly during COVID, assisting during COVID lockdowns. And I see there's a good number of Team Black Lion Lane here, and a special call out to Perre and Alessia, who are here today and had that similar gosh you're Dutch experience on her doorstep as Perre arrived, I think, with some special bread from Marks and Spencer's that Selma preferred. I think as our longest term resident, it feels like Selma has been a part of the community forever, and I think for most of us, and probably all of us, she was here before us, and it seems inconceivable that she won't be with us as we move forward. But it is wonderful that she was in St. Peter's Square taking her daily walk on the Sunday before she died, and we hope with Joss's support to arrange a memorial bench for her in the square. So it really is the end of an era, and I'm sure many of us who were thinking of Selma on Remembrance Sunday. She was a remarkable person, and it was a privilege to have known her. Thank you.
Dear friends and family of Selma and dear Jos. I met Selma for the first time in January 2020 during the launch of My Name is Selma. Mijn naam is Selma. Selma was interviewed and made a huge impression on everyone in the audience, including me. I'm Marijke Nachtegaal, Foreign Rights Director of publishing house De Bezige Bij and Thomas Rapp in Amsterdam, Selma's publisher. On behalf of our director and all my colleagues, I stand here to tell you about our international publishing journey with Selma. Selma's editor is Catharine Schilder. She's now at Alphabet Publishers. She worked meticulously on the manuscript with Selma. Without her, the book might not have been discovered. Or the story, I mean. A few days before the launch, Selma had been interviewed on the Dutch TV show De Wereld Draait Door, a very famous TV show. Selma and her book did not just touch all our hearts. Her book was an immediate, overwhelming success in the Netherlands, and so much so that a UK publisher took notice, called me, and made an offer on the UK rights of the book. After that, the news spread like wildfire, and in the years that followed, her book had 9 printings in the Netherlands and was translated in English, with editions in the UK and the USA, Hebrew, German, French, Italian, Polish, Portuguese, Finnish, Hungarian, Czech, Macedonian, Icelandic, and in July this year, we could send Selma the Romanian edition. In the UK, Selma's story made it to the major newspapers and the Radio Times. She was interviewed live on BBC Breakfast. In the US, she was interviewed by Trevor Noah of The Daily Show and by Christiane Amanpour. When it became too difficult for Selma to travel, she received film crews in her lounge or did interviews from her room upstairs, learned how to do Zoom meetings in her late 90s. Wow. When it became impossible for Selma to read, she listened to the television instead of watching, and to audiobooks to keep up with world news. I was born a little over 2 decades after the Second World War, and there is much about the horrors of that war I cannot fathom. Selma's story brought me a little closer to the facts. I trust most people in this church have read her book. If not, please do. Selma's intuition led her to play a significant role in the resistance, and it saved her life more than once. After the war, whenever she had the opportunity, she taught teachers and students about the danger of intolerance and hate, motivated by her own personal suffering. In her book, she says, "Losing Pa, Mums, and Clara is still the most shocking thing that ever happened to me. There's a devastating hole inside me that will never heal." I visited Selma each year on Sunday prior to the London Book Fair. It was so easy to be friends with her. She was kind, with a lovely sense of humor and an easy laugh, always curious about me and my daughters. She loved to take me for a walk to the beautiful square around the corner where she had spent happy years with her husband. She pointed out the grand stately home to me with beautiful balconies. She set the table for lunch with care with a quality bottle of red wine. I brought the pizza. In spring this year, she told me she was increasingly worried about today's world. It reminded her of the time just before the war. Her book taught me we should not be complacent. It can happen again. If it does, we have to distinguish right from wrong and be willing to take action. I'm so grateful for being introduced to Selma, to read her courageous story, to have witnessed her 100th birthday. Her eyesight was already bad. Always elegant, she cut the cake with help from her son Jos. Selma even received a letter of congratulations signed by Queen Elizabeth. I'm thankful Selma lived long enough to receive all the love and admiration from so many people, readers from all over the world. For the last time, I'm in the same space as you. I will continue to talk about you, Selma, to my girls, one day to my grandchildren, and to whoever wants to listen. I will never forget you and your story of bravery. It will continue to impact future generations. Of this, I'm very sure. You will be sorely missed. Light on all your roads.
I think the best word to describe my Aunt Selma is magnificent. She was a magnificent woman. She overcame huge trials and tribulations in her life, but she remained superbly positive to the end, always interested in people, what they were doing, always full of life. As an example, I asked my daughters, Sophie and Bryony, what they'd like said about Selma. They both talked about what an inspiration Selma was to them. Sophie said, Selma was always an inspiration to me as a child. She was always so glamorous, coming to visit, driving down to Bath in her soft-top convertible car, wearing such stylish clothes, and her generosity, always bringing us clothes and boots of hers, which were really lovely. Clothes and boots, as Sophie said, that I still wear now. Obviously, we knew about her past and her history, but it was like she made an active choice to live life to the full, in spite of all she had been through. And she was always so interested in our lives. And Bryony said, she was an inspiration to me. Even just a few months ago, I loved spending the weekend with her when we were looking through old photographs. Even though I had to describe the photos to her because she could no longer actually see them, she could remember each one of them, remember what the situation was and who the people were in the photos. And I also loved how she spoke her mind. And we asked Eloise just now, Selma's great-great-niece, if I've got that correct, what she remembered, a memory that she had. And she remembered that Selma had an official 100th birthday party, but we also did a smaller family birthday party for her at her house. And Jill made lots and lots of food and cakes and so on. And one thing that she made was a chocolate cake. And as a joke, Selma always had a very keen sense of humour. We got those novelty candles that, as you blow them out, they relight. And so we had this we didn't actually, I don't think we had 100 candles, but we had a very large number of candles. And Selma managed to blow them all out, and of course they all relit again. And we went through this a few times, and it was all very funny. What we hadn't realised was that the candles would actually all melt and go all over the chocolate. And that lovely chocolate cake was actually one that we found we couldn't eat afterwards. But anyway, so lots of lovely memories. The main memory, again, of Selma is positive, always interested in people, always interested in what other people were doing. Selma, of course, was always amazing at reinventing herself. Obviously, many people know of the Selma we've just been hearing about, who was in the Dutch resistance and then later in Ravensbrück concentration camp. But Selma was always much more than her war years. She reinvented herself constantly, always moving onwards, rarely looking backwards. From radio journalism in Bush House in London in the 1940s and 1950s, where she worked with the Dutch language radio service, the BBC, to then undertaking a degree in anthropology at LSE in London, to then teaching sociology and mathematics at the secondary school that we heard about just now. And then when she retired from school, when my uncle Hugo died in 1979, becoming the culture correspondent for several mainly Dutch media outlets. And then when she retired from all of that, as we've heard, she took up bridge and became a very good player. She took up painting and travelled to the south of France each year to paint, and soon exhibited her works in many galleries and exhibitions. She continued with her golf, playing into her mid and late 90s. And she decided to travel back to Ravensbrück each year to educate teachers and others about what happened in the war, knowing that without such first-hand testimony, these stories might be forgotten. I have very many memories of Selma at all stages of my life. One of the most interesting, I think, is of her and my mother. My mother and Selma were very different people in almost every way. They had different tastes in music, in art, in food, in everything, really, and they didn't really get on that well together. And then both their husbands, my father and then Hugo, died only a few weeks apart. And then an amazing transformation occurred. Almost from that day on until the day that my mother died, they became the firmest of friends. They would go on holiday together, spend a great deal of time together. They spoke extremely fondly of each other. And then for the last 40 years or so, since my mother died, Selma consistently spoke really fondly of my mother as one of her great friends. A few final words about Selma's book. I grew up knowing that her war experiences were too painful to be discussed. But in 1995 or 1996, when Selma was staying with us in Bath, I asked her if I could interview her about her life, as I didn't want all of her amazing memories, and as Bryony mentioned earlier with the photographs, she had a tremendous memory. I didn't want all of those amazing memories to die with her. She refused me, but instead I persuaded her to go into my study on her own and speak into a tape recorder about her experiences. I promised that I wouldn't listen to them, but that at least they would be there, preserved for posterity. Well, when she reappeared about an hour later, she told me that it had been a really harrowing experience, but that doing it had made her realize that actually she did need to get her story down. And that started the project that eventually came out as My Name is Selma. Every time after that, when I saw her or spoke to her on the telephone, I encouraged her to continue. And once she had finished it, I encouraged her to not be put off by the many rejections she received from publishers and to persevere. And of course, as we all know, she did persevere, and her book became this marvelous bestseller. Really the story of an ordinary woman doing extraordinary things. So, Selma, my rather amazing aunt, teacher, journalist, artist, bridge player, golfer, writer, and a testament to how to grow old, retaining a keen interest in life, in people, and in the world. A magnificent lady.
In life, it is important to be called by your own name, to be recognized by your name, and to be known by significant others in your life. It is important to every one of us, but because of her biography, it was particularly important to Selma, after having to live in hiding and after having to use a false name in very difficult circumstances. I'm glad that after this horrendous time during the Second World War, Selma has been able to live a long life in which she has experienced that she could be herself and has been recognized and appreciated for the person she truly was. That she was known by so many people, known and loved, by her family and friends, in her neighborhood, and in the Dutch and Belgian community. Known and loved as Selma van de Perre Velleman. Not only because of what she did and experienced during those difficult years during the Nazi occupation, but also known to us, we heard it, because of the person she was and the way she lived. Known to us as the wise and inspiring lady she was, always willing to share her stories, speaking about the importance of freedom and friendship, especially to new generations, but also always interested in and involved with what was happening in the world, the community she felt part of, and in the lives of the people she met. That made Selma a remarkable and much-loved lady to many. Her name will not be forgotten. On the importance of Selma's name, I wrote a poem in 2022 that was published in a magazine for secondary schools in the Netherlands. I shared the poem with Selma and will now share it with you, and I will read it in Dutch. Mijn naam is Selma Velleman, de dochter van een Joodse man. En ook mijn moeder was een Jood. Die afkomst werd hun beider dood. Ik was nog jong toen Hitler kwam en mij mijn pa en mams ontnam. Mijn lieve zus werd ook vermoord. Ik heb nooit meer iets van hen gehoord. Mijn naam was Selma Velleman. Iets wat ik niet meer zeggen kan. Ik heb nu een schuilnaam en die luidt Margaretha van der Kuit. Ik heb het met die naam gered als koerier in het verzet. Ook in het kamp mocht niemand weten hoe dat ik daadwerkelijk heette. Ik ben blij dat ik weer zeggen kan, ik ben Selma Velleman. De naam die pa en mams mij schonken en die zo lang niet heeft geklonken. En ik zal hen nooit vergeten, wie ze waren, hoe ze heten. Die Joodse vrouw, die Joodse man, Fem en Barend Velleman.
Here we have formed the circle of family and friends that were part of Selma van de Perre Velleman, her life. Here ends the path that we've walked together. Here we let go forever the body that we've known and loved. But her name, Selma van de Perre Velleman, will remain forever known in our hearts and written in the palm of God's hand. We will remember Selma as part of our lives. Now we will give her back to the Lord our God, that he will grant her rest in his mercy. Amen.